Today, we're just thrilled to have with us Maya von Rossum, whose commitment to environmental protection in my own state of Pennsylvania in the United States has been nothing short of extraordinary, including her involvement in the landmark decision of Robinson Township, one of the world's leading cases interpreting and applying the state's constitutional environmental rights provision. Jimmy, will you introduce Maya?
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Maya. You have a full bio on the website to read more about Maya, but so this is a very much a sketchy introduction, and she deserves much more. But let me tell you this about Maya. So Maya is a lawyer and an activist and an advocate who's changed the world. She holds her JD from Pace University Halp School of Law, an LLM from Widener University, Delaware Law School, and has been at the helm of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network since 1994, and is the founder of the Green Amendment movement. But that's not all. Maya has won dozens of awards and published dozens of articles and chapters and editorials all across the globe that's helping to shape conversation about what a Green Amendment means. But she's also been an enforcer of the nation's environmental laws, and most singularly the Clean Water Act, bringing cases to advance water quality and species protection throughout the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States and throughout the globe. And she's also an author, including of the leading book, The Green Amendment, soon to be released in its second edition. And also a co-author of the Quicken the Dead, an article about cooling water intake structures that I had the pleasure of working together with Maya on. So without further ado, Maya, the floor is yours. Tell us about this case.
Well, first off, thank you so much, Jim and Aaron, for having me. I really appreciate it. You two have been wonderful colleagues over the years, and I've really enjoyed fighting for the earth with both of you. So thank you so much. And I'm really pleased to be able to here to talk about the Robinson Township Delaware Riverkeeper Network case. And so I'll try to give a really quick summary of how that plays out in the power and importance of advancing constitutional environmental rights, and also dealing with the fracking industry that's devastating communities across the US and across the world, and impacting and will be impacting future generations. So in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is one of the 4 states in the Delaware River watershed, fracking had been advancing apace, really devastating the quality of the waters of the people of Pennsylvania, devastating groundwater supplies, resulting in deforestation, contamination of the air, impacting property values, impacting human health, giving kids cancer, really literally devastating Pennsylvania communities and Pennsylvania's families. And given the state of the law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it was really pretty easy for the fracking industry to have their way. But the way I like to say it is, for the frackers and their friends in the Pennsylvania legislature, it just wasn't easy enough. They wanted to find a way to make it even easier for themselves. And so very literally, leaders in the fracking industry went behind closed doors and they wrote for themselves a law that was put forth by the Pennsylvania legislature in 2012 and actually passed by the legislature and then signed by the governor. That came to be known as Act 13. Now, Act 13 was literally a gift basket to the industry, which you would expect because it was literally written by industry leaders. And it did a lot of bad things. It, for example, put in place automatic waivers for minimal environmental protection standards. It preempted local zoning authority mandating that drilling and fracking operations be allowed to happen in every part of every community in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including in the heart of residential communities. It alleviated the fracking industry of the obligation to notify those on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had become potentially contaminated by nearby fracking operations, and much more. And so while fracking was already running roughshod over Pennsylvania's communities and natural resources, if Act 13 were allowed to go into effect, the fracking industry was going to increase exponentially, including all of these devastating consequences. At my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we have been fighting fracking for many years, and in fact had successfully kept it from entering any portion of the Delaware River watershed, including the Pennsylvania portion of the watershed. But we knew, right, that fracking anywhere was bad for all of us everywhere. And so while Act 13 was going to advance fracking outside of the boundaries of the Delaware River watershed, we knew we had to find a way to take it on. But how do you take on a law that's been passed by a legislature and signed by the governor? You don't have many options as a community or as an activist. You can protest, you can try to get them to repeal it, you can try to get future elected officials to amend it. But the truth is, those things either weren't going to happen in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or if they did happen, repeal or amendment, those solutions would come too late after the industry had already wreaked devastating harm on more communities. So how are we going to challenge this law? And we recognized at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we had something that doesn't exist in most states across the nation. We had a long ignored amendment, an environmental rights amendment that was in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution that recognized and protected the inalienable rights of all people to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment, and the duty of all Pennsylvania government officials to protect the natural resources of the state for present and future generations. This amendment had been placed in the Pennsylvania Constitution literally 50 years ago, but very quickly it was declared by the Pennsylvania courts to be just a statement of policy and not to have any legal strength or life, meaningful legal strength or life on its own. But we felt like this Act 13 was such an incredible overreach in how it was going to advance the fracking industry that maybe we could get the Pennsylvania courts to revisit that bad precedent set so many years ago. And at this point, it was precedent that had been set 42 years ago. So we decided we were going to challenge provisions of Act 13 as being a violation of the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. Our case was joined by 7 towns, as well as some other individuals and a physician. And the case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which at the time was a very conservative Supreme Court led by a very conservative Chief Justice. But in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory out of that Supreme Court with the plurality opinion written by that conservative Chief Justice Ronald Castile. And what the plurality opinion said was that, in fact, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were, in fact, unconstitutional because they would violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And so in December of 2013, because of this constitutional, what I now have defined to be a green amendment in the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights, we defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13, preventing them from ever going into effect in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But we also breathed legal life into this long ignored environmental rights amendment and literally restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And ever since that time, we have been doing the hard work of continuing to define and strengthen what it means to have an environmental right in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
That's just
oh, go ahead, sorry.
That's just a fantastic introduction and overview, and it gives us a really good sense of the importance and just how monumental this case was. It was over 100 pages long, and it was really written in a way from the heart. One of the things I love about that opinion is that judicially, it's a very simple opinion. It just says, read the provision for what it is. It's in the Bill of Rights, it's actionable, and follow the language and don't impose these barriers to interpretation and application. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about sort of your role in lawyering it and how you structured the argument to get the members of the court, and particularly the Chief Justice, to really understand what was at stake.
So I had the honor of being the client as the Delaware Riverkeeper in the case, and working with the attorneys that actually did all of that great hard legal work that you're asking about. And so I really want to honor them because they were the true legal champions in this case. Jordan Yeager, John Smith, and Jonathan Kamen. They did the heavy lifting of figuring out how to appropriately craft the briefing and deliver the oral arguments to the court that really won the day. And one of the things that was so beautiful about what we did in advancing the arguments in this case was, as you said, first off, we said to the justices, and they embraced this request, that you look at the plain language of the Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment, that it does promise to protect the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania, that you recognize that this amendment is in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, and so that the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania should be interpreted and protected in the same constitutional way that we interpret and protect all the other fundamental rights that are contained in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, like the rights to free speech and freedom of religion. We shouldn't treat environmental rights any differently, legally, constitutionally, than we treat those other fundamental rights. And a corollary to that is we must recognize that the Bill of Rights provisions are not, including Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, are not a grant of new authority to government officials. It's actually a restraint on government official. By adding the Environmental Rights Amendment to the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, what we, the people of Pennsylvania, said to our government officials is that, yes, through this Constitution, we're giving you the power to govern over us. But we are telling you that when you exercise that power, you must do so with restraint. You must do so in a way that does not infringe fundamental included in the Bill of Rights section of our Constitution, which includes now the right to a clean and healthy environment, which is a very conservative legal principle, right? And really fundamentally is about the people of the state taking their power back from government when it comes to environmental rights. And that's one of the things that's most beautiful about it, is that it really is giving the power back to the people in the passage of this powerful amendment.
Maya, if I could follow up on that about the ongoing influence and impact of, at least in my opinion, is one of the most important environmental cases that's ever been decided because of its impact, not just in Pennsylvania, which has been profound, but also internationally and subnationally throughout the United States. And I'm wondering if you could just comment on those influences and that impact.
So one of the things that I did in the wake of our victory, our Act 13 victory, was I really, thought about and experienced the power and the importance of what we had accomplished by breathing legal life into this environmental rights language. And the court had talked a little bit about what was taking place in other states in the United States of America. I don't think that he referenced much internationally, although internationally there's so much powerful work, as you both know so well. But just thinking about the US, I took to heart this idea of what is actually happening in other states. And I looked at every single state constitution across the nation. And what they had in terms of environmental language. And I really recognized that what Pennsylvania had was very, very unique compared to all of these other states. And so I looked at what were the most powerful aspects of Pennsylvania's amendment: the fact that it was in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, the fact that it was self-executing, the fact that the language was clear about the environmental rights to be protected, and that it was protecting rights generationally for future generations, that it applied to every government official at every level of government, not just the legislature. And so I created this checklist, and I defined something that I call to be a green amendment. So Pennsylvania has a green amendment. And then in looking at all of these other constitutional provisions in other states, I found that there was only one other state, Montana, that had an amendment similar to Pennsylvania's, that fulfilled all of these green amendment criteria, and found that Montana similarly had some really powerful case law protecting Montana communities and environments from devastating environmental consequences, notably as a result of gold mining operations, but as well as some other activities. And I decided that I was going to change that, and that I was going to go forth across the US and try to get a constitutional green amendment added to every Bill of Rights section of every state constitution across the US, and then ultimately get a green amendment at the federal level as well, because we need them at the state level where there's tremendous power when it comes to environmental protection. But of course, the federal government has tremendous power as well. We need to hold federal government officials to account as well. And in doing this work also, often people, talk about and think about and look at what's also happening at the international level, because there's very powerful environmental rights language and work that's happening at the international level that is a great complement to what's happening here in Pennsylvania. But I do also recognize that getting constitutional green amendments throughout the US is a big job. And so that's really where I'm focusing my time and energy, but also feel like as we further define and refine what it actually means to have an enforceable, meaningful, inalienable constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment here in the US, we are not only dramatically advancing environmental protection in this country, but we're setting powerful precedent that will translate to other countries. And in fact, I was recently called by folks in Chile, where they are working on updating their constitution, and talked with them about the Green Amendment values that would translate well to their new constitutional effort. And have gotten some calls from some other countries as well, just trying to think about what are the elements that translate from our Green Amendment movement to the international level, but also looking at what's happening internationally and seeing what we can learn and bring back to our US Green Amendment movement, because there's a lot of powerful complement there. But I do recognize I'm focused on the US, and I personally best understand US law and how the US Constitution works. So that's where I'm focusing my energy.
That's such a fascinating story, though, that you can be a very US-based lawyer and still it's important to have these transnational conversations to see what we can share and what we can learn, and just how different perspectives and different assumptions kind of inform the conversation. I've been really struck by part of your story about, as the Delaware Riverkeeper, you found a way to engage in the conversation about fracking, even though it was outside of your physically geographic jurisdictional boundaries. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. And I guess what I'm wondering is sort of what advice you give to new lawyers or to people who are sort of just starting out and wanting, like you do, and have to make a difference. But we have the jobs we have the responsibilities we have. And if you could just sort of talk about that process of negotiating how you make a place for yourself in the work that you're doing.
So, that I really appreciate your asking that question, because that always has been a struggle for me, wanting to make a big difference, but also recognizing the power and importance of working at the more local level, and that too makes a big difference, because every advancement in environmental protection, whether it's legal, scientific, or just physical protection on the ground, is a tremendous contribution to the greater good. So, when I was I'm still the Delaware Riverkeeper, but when I really was very focused on the Delaware River watershed, every battle against a deepening project, a dam project, inappropriate development in the floodplain, against emissions that would contribute to the climate crisis, I really always had to remind myself that staying very focused at this more local level allowed me in many ways to be more effective and to really effectuate meaningful change on the ground in that place, in that space, for those natural resources in those communities, but that I was necessarily setting powerful precedent that would reverberate. Like every success against a pipeline project is a success that other pipeline battlers can use, right? Every precedent set in the court is a precedent that others everywhere can use. So I truly, truly believe no matter what we do, how we do it, where we do it, as long as we are advancing environmental protection, we are contributing to the greater good. All the way around. We must never think that by focusing even hyper locally that we aren't doing enough. We are actually doing powerful good with reverberations that we may never see or recognize or realize. But I can't tell you how many times, like years down the line, I learned about how some battle in a local watershed that we had undertaken and some success that we had achieved had powerful ramifications across the nation. That's sort of number one. So you're always contributing good. But number two, always being, one of the things I do always try to do, like with my Green Amendment movement, really do try to be mindful of looking at the bigger picture, because our successes can have reverberations that are bigger if we want them to. So, with our Green Amendment success in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I could have just continued to focus on Pennsylvania and advancing our environmental rights cause in Pennsylvania. But it was because I wanted to sort of look bigger that I was able to open up a door of immense opportunity for what I believe for irreplaceably important environmental protection at the national and international level. And so it was about being constantly mindful and looking for ways to make a bigger difference. They're both powerful and important, and we all, have our different ways of approaching our work. But as long as you're advancing environmental good, or at least trying to, you are part of the solution, and you should be proud of what you do, and always remember that it is an honor to be able to do environmental protection work. Not everybody gets to do it, but if you choose to take that path, it is not about you. It is about the earth and the communities you're going to protect. And just remind yourself that it's always an honor to do that work, and you will always find the energy you need, even on the down days, to keep going, pick yourself up, and achieve victory.